those who haven't met me, my name's Tim Herlihy. I'm a Tullamore Jew ambassador here in the US. I've been lucky enough to have been doing that for 5 years. And so my job, like any ambassador, is to go coast to coast, city to city, and introduce and reintroduce people to Tully. Today, that's going to be no different, but what I want to do is I want to do two things. I want to give you the story and the history of Irish whiskey, and we're going to tell that story and history by the iconic drinks that have defined it. So that's what I'm looking to do. We'll taste a couple of these drinks, and then at the end we're going to decide what we think are the 5 drinks that changed Irish whiskey forever. Okay? Sound good?
Yes.
Alright, perfect. So, for those that haven't met me, these are like the 2 things that define my existence. People often ask me, how did you become an Irish whiskey ambassador? They think, oh, you obviously went to ambassador college. You have been drinking Irish whiskey with your granddad since day 1. You know, you've basically grown up in the distillery. No, I started in an egg farm. So me and my dad have an egg farm. What we did was we got all the eggs we could find, we planted them in the ground, we watered them every day, we waited for the egg tree to grow. When that didn't happen, he went and got 80,000 hens, and I entered the world of whiskey. So eggs to whiskey, the natural transition. I'm sure a couple of you are questioning Tullamore Jew's recruitment policy at this point. I assure you, we only hire the best egg farmers to be our ambassadors. The second part is, I'm an Irish whiskey fanatic, so this is me actually a couple of weeks ago down the Tullamore warehouses, and then the bottom picture is basically how I plan my travel. I throw mini bottles at the map of America and we see where we wind up. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to look at different Irish whiskey. I want to say cocktails, but that may be exaggerating it. Let's call it drinks. And then we're also going to look at the history of Irish whiskey. So this is kind of the eras we're going to look at, and you can have a glance at that. But basically what I want you to know about Irish whiskey as a category and as a history is we are the birthplace of whiskey. Ireland is the epicenter of whiskey. We started distilling 500 years before Scotland did, and if you look at American whiskey, you'll also see a bit of Irish and Scottish influence there. But we were the first, not to distill, but we were the first to make whiskey. Irish monks started this off. It was purely in the monasteries. It originally started as medicinal purposes, but very quickly, and when I say very quickly, I mean almost immediately, did they realize, you know what, it's not just good for medicinal purposes, it also has recreational purposes too. And whiskey distillation started to spread across Ireland, and then the first place it emerged in Scotland is actually the closest part to Ireland, so Islay, the islands around Islay, which on a clear day, if you're at the Giant's Causeway, you can see Scotland. So essentially, the first Scottish distillers are essentially Irish people that can swim. So she's slow burn on that one, right? So I'll blame me, not you. So yeah, the first documented moment of Irish whiskey was in 1405, and then if you look at Scotland, their first documented in text was 1494. But we would have been distilling probably in 1600 AD is when we reckon, but just nobody was writing it down. And then we're the epicenter of Irish whiskey, or the epicenter of whiskey. It was where whiskey was born. We were a superpower in the world of whiskey. We were 60% of world whiskey sales. At one point we had as close as many as 2,000 distilleries in the island of Ireland, and they were very much home, rural distilleries. But we were 60% of world whiskey sales, and really in the space of 75 years, we went, so early 1900s, 58 distilleries, 60% of world whiskey sales, and in the space of 75 years, we went from 60% of world whiskey sales down to just 1%. We went from 58 distilleries down to just 2. Now that's a pretty dramatic decrease, and it's actually a pretty dramatic decrease in a very quick period of time. We're talking 1900 to 1975. We were nearly extinct as an industry. And I'm going to put up 4 factors here. And the top 2 were kind of when we were at our boom period and entering our boom period, but they were still underlying and at play. The first was the temperance movement in Ireland. This gentleman here called Father Matthew, and he was the rock star of the temperance movement in Ireland, if there is such a thing. And Catholic Church in Ireland, you can tell already that the church has a lot of influence in Ireland. But he, there's a lot of alcohol abuse going on in Ireland, like still. But basically, he started preaching and encouraging people to take the pledge of total abstinence. Island of Ireland, there was 7.5 million people at the time. He had 2 million people take this pledge. So immediately there was an impact on the number of distilleries, particularly around Cork, which is where he was from and started this movement. Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, Great Britain at that point. So he was also doing this temperance movement roadshow in modern day UK. And in fact, he was even invited over to the US by a president I've never heard of, President Zachary Taylor. Yeah. And there's an argument that he would have helped sow the early seeds of Prohibition in the US. There's actually a statue of him in Salem, Massachusetts, encouraging people to take the pledge. So this was a movement that started in Ireland and probably impacted further afield, but definitely impacted Irish whiskey. Second one is, top right, is a gorgeous, gorgeous still called the Column Still, or the Coffee Still at the time. There was a gentleman, he had very mean parents. They named him Anina's Coffee, or Anus Coffee.
Favorite type of coffee?
we got it right this time. I know we've been prepping all night for that, but so he invented the Column Still. The Column Still. He was a taxman, a gauger in Ireland, so he was taxing all the distilleries in Ireland. So when he came up with this new distilling piece of equipment, distillers in Ireland were like, this is the guy who's been raping my profits, trying to tax me, and now he wants to sell me a new piece of distilling equipment? I don't really like the sound of this guy, and I'm going to ignore it. Now, a lot of distilleries in Ireland did take it up. They did notice the efficiencies from it, but the big distilleries, particularly the big Dublin distilleries, didn't embrace it, and they were kind of the last surviving distilleries. So we never embraced it, this grain whiskey style, but in Scotland they absolutely did, and they used that as a blending technique and to kind of, well, one, more efficient, but also two, to kind of mellow out their harsh Highland malts. The two things that really killed us, like today Ireland's 4.5 million people. We drink a lot, but we don't drink enough to consume all we produce. So we're always been an exporting nation for whiskey, and particularly when you think of we're 60% of world whiskey sales at the peak of our powers. Independence in Ireland, it started in 1916, was the rebellion, the rising, but we gained independence in 1921. Great day for Ireland. The British didn't enjoy that day so much, and they said, listen, you can have your republic, but we're going to place a trade embargo on all Irish products. So whether it's butter, cheese, or Irish whiskey, they were not buying it, and they had influence with the British, well, the whole kingdom, the Commonwealth, that would have expanded out to Canada, Australia, and even India to a certain degree. So our sales collapsed. Our number 2 market gone. Prohibition was also around this time, and as you guys all know, America decided that all their problems would go away if alcohol went away, without fully realizing that alcohol, while it may be the cause of problems, it can also be a very effective solution to life's problems. So, Prohibition, America was our number 1 market in the space of 2 years. Our markets, our number 1 and number 2 markets, gone, meaning distilleries all across Ireland had to close their doors. Hence, how they went from 58 distilleries down to just 2. let's talk about the cocktails a little bit. Like when we talk about the initial era of Irish whiskey, it's not whiskey as we know it. It's very much like moonshine today. We call it putching. And this was essentially unaged whiskey or unaged spirit. And it would have been mixed with different herbs and spices. And that's how the monks would have started doing it in Ireland. So this is a modern day recipe. And if you're looking for putching, you have examples of Bon Putching, Glendalought's available in the US, and there's Teeling Putching as well in Ireland. But essentially this is white whiskey. And people often think it's illegal, and it was made legal in 1992. So you can see examples of that. But in the beginnings of what we call Irish whiskey today, this is how it would have been enjoyed in terms of putching. Late 1800s, early 1900s, Irish whiskey, peak of its powers. And then 1862, when cocktails began, thank you Jerry Thomas, you would have had a lot of Irish whiskey cocktails, probably the most famous being the Tipperary, which is what we have in front of me. Okay? Now, anyone that knows me knows that I like to enjoy my Tullamore Dew with a bit of a toast, and today will be no exception. So, yeah, we'll be nice on this one. This is maybe poor misfortune, rich in blessings, slow to make enemies, quick to make friends, but whether poor, rich, quick, or slow, nothing but good times from this drink forward. So, sláinte, cheers. So this is my favorite Irish whiskey cocktail. The reason being is it gets me out of a lot of trouble when it comes to St. Patrick's Day season, because everyone comes to me and asks for green cocktails. And my compromise is I'll give you green chartreuse. So the Tipperary first made its appearance 1916 with Hugo's publication on mixed drinks. And the story behind it is there's a song called The Long Road to Tipperary. And a guest was in the bar and he was singing or humming this song, It's a Long Road to Tipperary. And as he was requesting this concoction, the bartender decided, you know what, I'm going to name it the Tipperary after the song he was humming. A little side note, guys, I'm actually very happy to be here because I was moments away from not making it here. On Wednesday, I lost my bag. In Dublin, and you know I was going through. It's like shit. What's in this bag? Okay, laptop, passport. Passport's pretty crucial. Really needed my passport. So that was a bit of a problem. And then I'm like, I left it in a restaurant. I need to get in touch with this restaurant. And then the other thing started coming to mind. It's like, okay, if they're rooting through my bag, what's in the bag that can help identify me? All right, passport, business card. They can get in touch. What else is in the bag that might be embarrassing? So, I have something I want to give away, and it's because of that incident. Passport made it, so I made it. I got the bag back. And I always like to carry this book around to kind of humble my kind of over-the-top cocktail friends. So whenever they need a cocktail book to crank them down a notch, I like to show them semenology. So, Tim, can I see that? We can. I didn't know if you were going to throw it at him.
Yeah, don't hit him in the face with that.
So the good news is I found my bag, I found my passport, and I'm also never brave enough to go back into that restaurant ever again. So to avoid that situation, I could always just not lose my bag again. But I think what I'll do is I'll just give this book away at the end of this. So if anyone has a toast at the end, you can claim that book. So
this is really about semen.
Yeah.
What does everybody see that?
I've seen that.
I was going to use that as inspiration for next year's seminar, but I don't think the CAP team would appreciate it.
The number one drink in here, the first drink is called Prostate Passion.
So, guys, a couple of other cocktails showing this golden era of Irish whiskey, the Brainstorm, the Emerald as well. And these are all classic cocktails that were around during that 1800, early 1900 period when Irish whiskey was at its boom, but you're also starting to see cocktails spread. I want to throw, this happened a little bit before, but I thought this was an interesting story. It didn't impact Irish whiskey at the time. It did much later in the early 90s, but the highball is credited to Patrick Gavin Duffy, and the inventor of ginger ale. It happened in Belfast. There's an American guy called Thomas Cantrell, and he invented ginger ale. Now, it was ginger ale that we would know today as ginger beer.
Right.
And I'm forgetting who started Canada Dry, but that would have been when ginger ale, as we know today, was invented. So, starting in Belfast, so a very Irish story, and then, as you may have guessed, Patrick Gavin Duffy, guess where he was from. So, he invented the highball, but ginger ale, or ginger beer, ginger ale at the time, ginger beer today, would have started in Ireland. And this was huge impact in the 90s, particularly when Jameson was making its big push. They originally started going with Jameson and Coke, so that they could compete with Jack Daniels and win that business. But what they found was a better pairing was Jameson and ginger ale. So that became a big part of the Irish whiskey rising in the 90s. Another drink called a hot toddy. I'm going to tell you the Irish story about this. There is the Scottish story, but the Irish story is about a pharmacist called Robert Benton Todd, and it was his kind of cure for all your ailments. He also claimed that it was often cheaper to heat your drink rather than to heat your home. So if you're cold in the winter.
So I was telling you the other night that we were talking about home. I grew up, my family are Irish immigrants, and that was my, from the time I was little, when I was teething, it was whiskey, when I was sick, my granny made hot toddies. I think mostly because you felt better, but it also knocked your ass out, so you could actually rest and get better. But I still to this day, when I start feeling ill, first thing I do is make my medicine.
To clear your nose, heat your toes, and warm your soul. Hot toddy. And then the Irish coffee. Probably the most famous Irish whiskey cocktail there is. An extensive story on this. This began in Foynes, which today we know is Shannon Airport. So it was 1942. The head chef there was Joe Sheridan. And you've got to remember, Shannon Airport is right on the edge of Ireland. So this was a period of time where every plane that was making the leap across the Atlantic would have to stop in Foynes for refueling before it made its 18-hour journey across the Atlantic, stopping in Newfoundland and then going on to New York. These are planes which were nicknamed flying boats, okay, because they would land in the water. So the story goes, there was a plane that was up in the air for 6 hours, battling a storm, trying to make it across the Atlantic, had to turn back, landed in the water, and in a good way, that was the plan. And all the people were disembarking, returning to Foynes. Joe got the call. I don't know how he got the call, if it was a phone or what. But he was given a heads up that he's going to have to heat up, warm up a couple of unhappy patrons that were hoping to be in Newfoundland and not back at Foynes. So he made this drink, and this was his own personal hangover cure. And he made this drink and served it up, and somebody was like, oh, is this a Brazilian coffee? And he was like, no, it's a Gaelic coffee. And that's where the Irish coffee began. And I always say that it was invented in Ireland, but made famous in America. And anyone been to San Francisco? Buena Vista? Okay. So there was a gentleman called Stan Delaplane. He was a travel writer. He used to write Stan's postcards, and he would write it all about Europe. But because he was going to Europe, he had to stop in Foynes, and later known as Shannon Airport. So he was seeing the Gaelic, the Irish coffee all the time. So he was meeting with Joe, chatting about it, and he's got his recipe, brought it back over to America. I think a lot of people know the Buena Vista, but maybe what you won't know or have heard of is Tom Bergen's in LA. It's LA's oldest Irish pub, and it's the house of Irish coffee. And the Buena Vista and Tom Bergen's go through a fight on which one made it famous. They both argue to who created it, but that's not true. And Stan shared his recipe with both these establishments. The Buena Vista just became more famous for it. And when they were trying to recreate this recipe in San Francisco, they couldn't get the heavy cream right. And so there was a guy sitting down the end of the bar, and he was getting all the failed Irish coffees. And they actually had to go to the mayor of San Francisco, who had a dairy, and they went to him to come up with essentially a heavy cream, a high fat content cream, so that they could use it in the Buena Vista Irish coffee recipe. For anyone that hasn't been, the Buena Vista is a pretty small place. They will make 10 to 12 Irish coffees at a time. It's bartender theatre. This gentleman here is called Larry. Always ask for Larry, because Larry is a magician posing as a bartender, and he will entertain you for hours on end with magic tricks. So, Sean, did you have a question?
Yeah, I forget, like, how many do they sell per day? You know?
So the key number is 2,000, because it's averagely 2,000 a day, and they do 2,000 cases of Tullamore Dew a year.
It's insane.
They are the biggest Irish whiskey bar on the planet. They open at 7, maybe 8 in the morning, and they do Irish coffees to go. They're not just about that. So they make your non-alcoholic Irish coffee, and they sell you a mini, and then you can play mixologist and come up with your own Irish coffee. There is a little bit of a debate over where the Irish coffee began. Foynes and Joe Sheridan get the most kudos on it, but there's an argument that was born in Dublin because Joe Sheridan worked at a place called the Dolphin's House there before, and they suggest that he may have refined it there before moving into Foynes. And then there was also another Joe called Joe Jackson, so this is very much a tale of two Joes, who simultaneously invented it in Donegal in the northwest of Ireland at his hotel, Jackson's Hotel. Unfortunately for him, and not to his knowledge, Joe Sheridan had invented it 5 years earlier. So there was this debate raging in Ireland over who actually invented it. And this was a period of time, so this was the 1950s, when Irish whiskey was on its knees, near extinction, was at 2% of world whiskey sales. Like, battling for survival, there would have only been 6 distilleries open at the time, and that later went down to 2. But this was the drink that was keeping the pulse of Irish whiskey beating, and if it wasn't for the Irish coffee, we could have been facing near extinction. So yeah, ask for Larry when you're at the Buena Vista. We got a couple of Irish coffees coming out now in a second, but this will be our Irish coffee toast. My favorite thing about the Irish coffee is it's the perfect balanced diet. 4 major food groups: alcohol, sugar, caffeine, and fat. That's my kind of food pyramid. And this is something I'm a big fan of, the Irish coffee. And in January 25th, I'm sure you all know, it's National Irish Coffee Day. Yeah, I hope you haven't made too many plans. But in Chicago, I'm looking to break the world record for the world's biggest Irish coffee. Currently, that stands in a bar in Portland called Paddy's, and they created it on St. Patrick's Day about 60 years ago. 160 gallons of Irish coffee glory and goodness. So I won't tell you the exact measurements that we're looking to do, but we're looking to break that record around the 200-gallon mark.
What receptacle do they use?
So what we're going to use is it's an acrylic tank, and it's made in Las Vegas, and I don't know if we've any Animal Planet fans, but it's a company called ATM. They have a TV show called Tanked on Animal Planet, and they make aquariums. So they're going to be making our...
It's going to taste a little fishy.
Hey!
Whoa!
What a butt! So you're having a Vegas custom.
Where are you doing the event? Where are you doing the event?
It's going to be a Philadelphia.
There's no nutmeg on this. I don't want it.
Where do you say?
This coffee.
No. Where do you
Star, where's the nutmeg?
Especially on 13, 14,
It's going to happen.
On the sperm book? Tim, he has not put the sperm book down.
This book is fucking wild, bro. I mean, that's gross.
Is that sperm on top of it?
Yes, man. Yes.
Alex, take it off. Take it off.
Alex, look at this book.
Why is he so sticky?
What's that?
Get it, it's so sticky.
Order that. Does it tell you?
Get it on Amazon. Stocking stuffers.
Does it tell you what you should eat the day prior to all the flavor you taste good?
Yeah,
Should I be worried? Is this like a special whipped cream that you got from that book?
No. Should have revealed those. So guys, to give you one of the untold stories about the Buena Vista in San Francisco is, like, you gotta imagine the buying power of that. So you may notice when you talk about the Irish coffee, you have two different types of glasses. So the top right is traditional Irish coffee glass, and then you'll have your, what I call the San Francisco Irish coffee glass. And that was made famous in San Francisco. I think it's better. I think it gives a better balance to it because of it's a 6-ounce glass, and so you have better proportions there.
It looks kind of like a goblet, like a small.
Yeah. So these were made by Libby in Oklahoma.
Yes.
And so the Buena Vista were like, oh, we're the #1 supplier or customer of these glasses. And they went to China to get them produced there. And their business plan was to basically put Libby out of business on it. So we're going to go to China, have these glasses made, and bring them back to San Francisco to use at the Buena Vista. But also, we're going to sell them to all these other bars in San Francisco as well. So if they want the traditional San Francisco Buena Vista style Irish coffee glass, they got to come to the Buena Vista. The bars of San Francisco came together and they wrote to Libby, and it's like, listen, how much do we need to do a run on this machine? So I don't know what it was, but it was something like 2 years supply worth of it. So they actually did it. They had the machine go, 2 years supply worth, and sold it to all the bars in San Francisco that wanted it. So yeah, it's I think it's a brilliant class, and it's interesting. We talk about the whiskey for sure, we talk about the coffee, and if we're really into it, we talk about the sugar and the cream, but we never talk about the glass. I think that's a fun story to it as well. So, we're struggling. We're on life support. We're 1% of world whiskey sales. We're down to 2 distilleries. We're in crisis, and then things get better. It'd be kind of lousy if it ended there. So we have a couple of drinks that we need to give a bit of thank you to in the late, in the 80s, the 90s. This was the comeback years of Irish whiskey. And actually, before I go right into that, we went to just 2 distilleries. And it kind of began in 1966. You had all the remaining distilleries close their distillery doors, come together to form one company. That company was called Irish Distillers. So it started 1966. You had Tullamore Dew and Powers come together, and then later you had Jameson, you had Paddy, and they formed Irish Distillers. So they went about opening up a new facility in 1975 called Middleton Distillery. At the same time, the only distillery remaining outside of Middleton was Bushmills in Northern Ireland. They would later join the fold in 1972, and then 1975 in Middleton. So you had all Irish whiskey owned by one company. Bushmills, Paddy, Redbreast, Green Spot, Jameson, Powers, Tullamore Dew, they were all together as one company. You had the Cooley Distillery open up in 1987, and they didn't have spirit old enough to be called whiskey until the 90s. But essentially for a large period of time, you had all Irish whiskey owned by one company. So they decided, we're going to pick a whiskey for the US market, because they didn't want all these whiskies competing against each other. So they decided to pick Jameson to be that whiskey. And they put a big push behind it, and it became really successful in the bartender community as well. We're going to look at a couple of drinks that, yes, made Jameson famous in this 80s, 90s period, but also did a lot for Irish whiskey too, as a whole. Controversially, the car bomb. I was fascinated by the car bomb when I moved over here.
Somebody told me that it's called a peacemaker
Yeah.
somewhere else. This is the only drink that I've ever literally refused. I'm like, I just can't call it that.
So in Ireland, we don't know what this is. So when I moved over, like if you ask for a car bomb in Ireland, they're not going to beat you up because they don't know what you're talking about. Okay? And then, so when I moved over, I was like, I got to get to the bottom of this. I need to know the story. And, I figured out the upfront story pretty quickly. Thanks, America. Yeah, and you got to think about this. Like, this is like calling in a kamikaze, or
the 9/11?
Yeah, or the 9/11.
glad you said that. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing to say. There's not a drink called that, but it's that. So I looked into it, and there is an inventor of the Irish car bomb. His name is Charlie Oat. He is in Norwich, Connecticut, and in 1979 he was at Wilson Saloon. Sorry, not an Irish pub at all. He's an American guy. It was St. Patrick's Day, and him and his friends were doing shots of Kahlua Baileys. And very quickly, they called it the grandfather. No, they were toasting to the grandfathers. They called it the grandfather. It lasted for about 5 minutes because they realized that that's a pretty bitchy shot. And it being St. Patrick's Day, they got some Irish whiskey, and this is where the offense began. They called it the IRA. Okay? Kahlua Baileys and Irish whiskey. Nobody's heard of that. I've never heard of that. But he goes about 6 months later to a year. He's not quite sure. He was shooting his IRAs, and he had his pint of Guinness, and he, for whatever reason, goes bombs away, and off he went. The birth of the car bomb. And I'm like, Charlie, this is interesting. But I don't understand why it went beyond Wilson Saloon, why it went beyond Norwich, Connecticut, why it went all across America. Every drinks company in the world is trying to figure that one out. So he goes, yeah, it's Norwich, Connecticut is a naval town. And Wilson Saloon was actually a big drug bar. And all the guys from the naval base would come in, they have their drinks and they do their car bombs, and then they'd be shipped off to San Diego or wherever. So essentially the US Navy has, oddly enough, been delivering Irish car bombs all around the US and making it famous. And Charlie's an interesting guy. And I was like, we talked about the name, and he was like in his 20s and he wasn't thinking, and he never thought it'd go beyond his group of 5 or 6 friends or even beyond his bar. And I'm like, well, it's pretty cool. You have created a drink, a poorly titled one, but you have created a drink. And at that point he looks at me and goes, I didn't create a drink. you're not doing me justice there. I created a category. I'm like, okay.
Created the fucking body.
So I'm like, go on, Charlie, you've got my intrigue here. He goes, I created the first ever bomb drink. I created the bomb category. And I've tried to disprove him. Boilermaker, ooh, depending on who you're talking to. But Jaeger bombs, like there's bomb menus in bars. And basically he's proud of the fact he's been accelerating people's intoxication since 1979. The thing I didn't realize was Kahlua was an ingredient in the car bomb.
Is it still? It's not still, is it?
No.
According to him?
According to him.
According to evidence?
Yeah. So I have a request. If we're ordering car bombs or if you're putting a car bomb on the menu, don't call it a car bomb, call it the Charlie Yellow after the event.
What's his last name?
Oat.
Oh,
Yeah.
Charlie.
Yeah.
OAT?
OAT.
Because you personally want to do that, or because you personally don't like the car bomb?
Both. Yeah, okay. Well, you got a story to tell. So, anyone from Pensacola here? No. But there's an Irish Car Bomb Hall of Fame, a place called Paddy O'Leary's. They, if you order 50 car bombs, you get your name on this part of the wall. Nice little plaque. You do 100, you're on the better part of the wall. If you have 10,000, you should have bought the bar.
Right.
But there's a gentleman that had 10,000 car bombs over the course of 13 years, and he is alive. He stopped doing it now. But
Did you realize you could have bought that bar like 6 times over?
pretty much. So, Car Bomb Hall of Fame, Pensacola, Florida.
Hey, pickleback.
Are we really gonna pickle that?
Wait, are you fucking alive? It's not disgusting. I just did it the other night. I was like, stop pushing the sun.
So the pickleback. Again, I move over from Ireland. I was used to selling eggs and I come across car bombs and picklebacks.
They're delicious.
Pickleback was actually invented with bourbon originally. Bushwick Country Club 2006, a guy called Reggie Cunningham. And Bushwick Country Club is not a cravat kind of country club. It's a bit more colourful than that. And
Where's Bushwick? Brooklyn?
Yeah, Brooklyn.
Bushwick? Brooklyn. This is not actually
It's got a little mini one in the back.
So this was a drink that took the nation by storm, particularly on the East Coast. Started off with bourbon, I think it was all crow, and this was born when a fairly annoying guest, by all accounts, asked for it, and Reggie made it, and eventually tried it himself, and then became a little bit of a thing, and then became a thing in Brooklyn. Because Irish whiskey was the bartender's handshake at the time, it became very much associated with Irish whiskey. And I bumped into connoisseurs in Brooklyn of the pickleback, and they brought their own pickle juice with them. And I'm like, okay, I played this game. You know, I bring my Irish Tully to bars. Okay, they probably work for either Brooklyn Brine or McClure's. I'm like, okay. And they're like, no, we just make our own pickle juice. It's really good. Try it. Yeah. So, but bars do take pride in whether they Brooklyn Brine or McClure's, or if they make their own. In fact, it's a great way of making $1 off pickle juice. And it just reminds me of the cheeseburger.
Have you ever done the hamburger shot? The ketchup, mustard on the backside of that? On a spoon, I swear to God. I'll make it for people all day.
It's shipped.
Come by tonight, I'll make it for you.
I think we need to do a seminar on extreme ingredients. ingredients the world doesn't want. So when the pickleback, basically when Irish whiskey became shots and became popular in the US, this was kind of actually, ignore the Tullamore Gin Distillery for a second. This was the landscape of distilling in Ireland. You had 4 distilleries, okay? We've grown from 2. So you have Middleton down in Cork, where most was home to most Irish whiskies. You had Bushmills as well. You had the Cooley Distillery, and then you had a very small distillery called Kilbeggan, which still is about that size. Kilbeggan, the brand, actually all of the whiskey comes from the Cooley Distillery. Kilbeggan is very cool to visit. So there was 4 distilleries. Today, it looks something like this. You have a lot of distilleries that are planning, or they're built, they're producing, but they don't have spirit old enough to legally be called whiskey. So 3 years you need to be matured in wooden casks on the island of Ireland. Interestingly, wooden casks, because if you're in Scotland, it specifies it has to be oak. So we've yet to do it, but we've maybe a fun experiment to do there with other types of wood. So at the moment you have 12. Did you make a wood joke? Did you? So we have 12 distilleries that are producing spirit, either whiskey, or they have stock that is whiskey, or they're producing spirit that is intended to be whiskey. We only have, I think it's 7 that have liquid old enough to legally be called whiskey. You're seeing a complete revitalization of Irish whiskey, new distilleries, embracing new distillery style or new Irish whiskey styles, a lot more liquid innovation, and we're kind of entering that new era of Irish whiskey and taking quantum leaps to get to the golden era where we were 60% of world whiskey sales. Today we're only 6% of world whiskey sales. So we have a long, long way to go, and it's a very, very exciting time. Not just for new distilleries, old brands being revived, new brands being created, but really new styles of Irish whiskey being experimented with and played with. So very, very exciting stuff. New Tullamore Distillery, 2014 was when it opened. So we are basically another year away from having spirit old enough to legally be called whiskey. I was there on Monday. Gorgeous, gorgeous distillery. When William Grant bought Tullamore Dew in 2010, they made a serious investment. They hired me on a mega salary. And then secondly, they spent 50 million on building a brand new state-of-the-art distillery. What I love about it is this distillery is going to look gorgeous today and in 100 years' time. It's very much a distillery, not a whiskey factory, to be confused with an oil refinery. These are stills. In Ireland, you have 3 different styles of whiskey. You have malt whiskey on the right. So we've all had single malt whiskey. It's malted barley. It's barley we soak in water, trick it into thinking it's spring, begins to germinate, converting starch into sugar. You add yeast, you get 2 things, alcohol and CO2. And then you'll ferment it, and then you'll distill it, and you'll have wonderful malt whiskey. Second style is grain whiskey. In Ireland we use corn, we call it maize, distilled in column stills, very light, very sweet, delicate style of whiskey. And then the third style of whiskey, unique to Ireland, this is where it gets complicated. It's called pot still whiskey, okay? Now, a lot of people think they know what pot still whiskey is. They think of the copper pot stills. We've made this difficult in Ireland because we have 2 definitions for the same phrase. When we say pot still, yes, we mean beautiful copper pot stills, but what we really mean is it's a mash of malted and unmalted barley. No one does it in Scotland. They can, but nobody's chosen to do it yet. And the reason that exists is when we were under British rule, there was a tax on malted barley. And to avoid this tax, we decided to come up with a new mash bill that was malted, so germinated, and ungerminated barley, spring barley. Good news was it avoided tax. The exceptionally good news was it created this new style of Irish whiskey that gives you this creamy mouth texture, pepperiness, spice, and they're your three whiskies. Grain, light, sweet, delicate, column distilled, made from corn. Malt whiskey, fruit, citrus notes, made from barley, malted barley, distilled in copper pot stills. And then the third, unique to Ireland, pot still whiskey, is combination of malted and unmalted barley, gives you this creaminess, pepperiness, spice, and they're your three styles. The really cool thing about Tullamore Dew is we're the only Irish whiskey to be made up of all three styles. So you have all the good things about Irish whiskey in one glass and in one bottle. I want to move it along. Today, as we enter the new era, we're doing a lot of different kind of craft cocktails. This is one from Mr. Wanderich, and he created this because he had nothing else left in his drink cabinet, and it's actually pretty good. He calls it a whiskey. And what you're starting to see is there's not that many Irish whiskey cocktails, and we're starting to see more and more come into the books. Principally because of this place. The Dead Rabbit, Jack McGarry. No one in the history of the planet has created more Irish whiskey cocktails than Jack. And he's pretty good at it too. And this is just one I took. It's called the Precision Pilot. It's made with Tullamore Dew Phoenix. It's a real delight. And they opened 2012. And they decided to combine high-end cocktails with the Irish pub, inspired by the Merchant Hotel where they worked at in Belfast. The first Spirited Award winner in the island of Ireland, and they were doing wonders for the cocktail scene, but they also noticed that their guests enjoyed a pub down the road called the Duke of York, which was just a phenomenal, or still is a phenomenal pub. So they wanted to combine the two and have the Dead Rabbit be a showcase, an icon for Irish whiskey, and they did just that, and they continue to do that. So, Irish whiskey through the ages. The beginnings, we were using putsheen punches, before we even kind of quite had whiskey. The golden era of Irish whiskey in the late 80s, late 1800s, early 1900s. Where we were the #1 whiskey in the world, and to kind of go hand in hand with that, we had a lot of Irish whiskey cocktails, whereas the Tipperary, the Brainstorm, even stuff like the Cameron's Cake, the Emerald, the innovatively titled Irish whiskey cocktail, the Wild Eyed Rose, and then when we were on our knees, with distilleries closing all over the island, the effects of independence from Great Britain, the effect of prohibition in the US, we were near destruction and extinction, and the only thing that kept us alive and our pulse going was the Irish coffee. The double-edged sword to that was Irish whiskey became an ingredient. Our global ambassador, John Quinn, he tells me about a trip when he was in Australia, and he ordered a Tullamore Dew. So what he ordered? They gave him an Irish coffee. And he goes, no, I'll have Tullamore Dew, and he goes, oh geez, I'll have to go back out to the kitchen to get that. So it wasn't even on the back bar. So yeah, it kept Irish whiskey's heart beating, but it also created a huge perception problem that the industry had to tackle. The comeback years, really that's thanks to everyone in this room and bartenders around the US, where we embraced it. Irish whiskey was seen as having no rules, it's not pretentious, you can sip it neat, you can have it as a shot, and very different to how Scotch was perceived at the time. So whether it was car bombs, picklebacks, or just shots, we were all good in the comeback years. And then today, with new distilleries opening up everywhere, new brands being created, more importantly, new whiskey styles being developed, it's really, really exciting times, with a lot more to come, whether it's single malt, single grains, single pot stills like Red Breast or Green Spot being released, or then just wicked cool blends with cool finishes. We have a lot to see to come from Irish distilleries back home. So, yeah. The belt wasn't just for I probably should explain the belt. Like I did explain semenology, so I think the belt would be an easy explanation. I was lucky enough to win the first ever Icons of Whiskey Award for Best Irish Whiskey Ambassador. And they sent me this lovely plaque, or picture frame I put on my wall, but it's terribly immobile. And nothing says praise and recognition like self-praise. So I commissioned a belt. Nobody gave this to me. So basically, the infamous words of Mr. McGregor, we're not here to take part, we're here to take over, and the takeover has only just begun. So, guys, we have, actually, I'll take a couple of questions, we'll enjoy some Tullamore Dew, and then, yeah.
How many drinks have that book take?
My favourite thing of that book is the frequently asked questions at the back. Stuff like, is it okay to substitute human semen with animal semen? Yeah. Apparently it was inspired by the cookbook he made first. But
Can you give us a nice raunchy toast?
I'll give you a toast in a sec. Yeah.
No, so, I didn't have a question, I wanted to hear you. So when you came to my bar and you shut down the item service and you stood on the bar and you gave a toast to about 200 people, and I want to hear that toast again. Friendships, good shit.
Oh,
Yeah.
Really makes you
Stand on a table.
Or just the chair.
Stand on a
chair.
Is anyone got a question that isn't a toast? I will come to the toast in a second. No, we're all good. Yes?
What do you find the biggest obstacle in taking back a small percentage of the market that's very overlooked and not really well received, and now it's becoming more and more popular?
Yeah, is that we're becoming so many more things, because we're starting to enter premium single malts, premium single pot stills, and so we're basically pushing the perceptions and boundaries of what people think Irish whiskey is. And so, like, whether it's Tullamore Dew, whether it's Jameson, people understand that, you know, it's like, yeah, I can sip it, I can have it in the rocks, mixer, I can shoot it, it's all good, it's friendly. And so is the spirit itself. The kind of challenge is when we have like our 15-year-old trilogy, or when we're releasing single pot stills, is that's on par with premium single malts or premium bourbons, and people the consumer hasn't quite got that yet. But that's a time thing. So it's becoming more things to more people. That's probably what it is. But we got the liquids to do that, and that's known in Ireland, but it probably hasn't hit the rest of the world yet. Yeah.
Pretty specific reasons why peat isn't utilized in Irish whiskeys.
Yes.
As much as it isn't.
So today you only have one whiskey that uses peat. It's called Connemara. It's made by the Cooley Distillery. And historically, like, Ireland is covered in peat. In fact, we export a lot of our peat to Scotland so that they can create their peated single malts. And so distilleries would have smelled the peat before we imported coal. The reason that doesn't exist is when we go back to the 70s, when Irish whiskey was one company, and all these whiskies and brands that would have used peat died away. And they decided, we're one company, we're going to be known for a couple of things: non-peated whiskies and triple distilled. So they kind of not really wrote history, but they redefined what Irish whiskey was, because it was only one company. So you're going to see a lot more peated Irish whiskey.
Teeling's what released me.
They're a 21-year-old, which is lightly peated. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I'll give you a couple of toasts. I'll give you the toast that probably got me in the second most amount of trouble I've ever been in. So I was on a podcast in LA, and it was an hour long. We were sitting in a pub drinking away. But Dan Dunn, who was the presenter, and he came very armed with toasts. So he stole a lot of my material, which I'd stolen from elsewhere. And I was running out of clean, poetic, even cheeky ones, and I just was left with downright filth. So we were closing out the show, and I just had this left in my head, and I go, Dan, I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Freddie. He's going to give birth, or he's not going to give birth. His girlfriend is going to give birth to what turned out to be a healthy, beautiful baby girl. And I want to do a toast to that. And Dan's looking at me. Your mate Freddie isn't even listening to this show, and you're hijacking my show for this. So I go, Dan, this is a bit of advice Freddie gave me. He always told me to remember if I'm thinking about having a kid. He goes, here's to the 3 birds of babies. Here's to the stork, brings good babies. Beware the raven, it brings bad babies. He always told me to write this down. Remember the swallows, they bring no babies. So no babies. No, it's pretty tame, but for radio it's not that great. Like.
That's right. Starting that shit anyway.
Yeah, well, if you want something, just tying into semenology. Not even, that's not fair. Here's the batteries and buttholes. 2 things you will should never lick, but probably will. And then I want to give a toast that ties into the book, but I want you all to help me out with this. This is what we call the Wispy Prayer, okay? You may have noticed that is Bible inspired. I'm hoping you also may have noticed it has whiskey, because it's a little bit like a wallet. You don't give a tip flask or a wallet empty, it's bad luck. So I'm saying we, but really it's Leah down the back who's filled that. Thank you, Leah. For anyone that hasn't met Leah, Leah is our marketing manager for William Grant in St. Pete, Tampa, and Pensacola. So, all right, good girl, despite what you may have heard about her. She's great. So guys, this is the Wispy Prayer. Please repeat after me. This is, you ready?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is to our whiskey. That are aged in barrels. Hallowed be thy drink. They will be drunk. I will be drunk. Responsibly. At home is in the tavern. Give us this day our favorite spirit, and forgive us our livers. Forgive us our spillages, as we forgive those who spill against us. And save us from hangovers. For thine is the whiskey, the Irish whiskey, the Tullamore Dew, forever and ever. Do you know the word?
Amen.
Nah, it's the bartender, so so sláinte, go in peace. There are good ships, there are wood ships, there are ships that sail the sea, but the best ships are French ships, and they always be.
I love it.
I'm going to give this room back because I'm dramatically over time. You guys are hungry for lunch. The couple of things I'd like you to remember is where Tullamore Dew gets its name from. The town in Tullamore, right in the centre of Ireland. Please let me know if you find yourself there. I really want to show you our distillery. Don't ever be shy. Named after the town, but also Daniel E. Williams, who went to work at our distillery at the age of 14. Eventually went on to own it, lending his name and initials to our bottle of whiskey. Second thing, 3 styles of Irish whiskey: grain, malt, and pot still. Okay? And you can have single pot still, single malt, single grain, or a combination of 2 of those, or even a combination of 3 like Tullamore Dew. So I like to say we have all the good things about Irish whiskey in one glass and one bottle by having all those 3 components. The final thing is, guys, always enjoy your Irish whiskey, whether it's in a cocktail, neat, shot, with a toast, with friends, and we should do that the rest of the weekend, okay? So I'll be around till Tuesday morning, and let's hang out. So thank you guys.